Hello, this lesson is going to be on domain and range. Basically, suppose I have these problems here where the problem asks me to state the domain and range of each function graphed below. Basically, domain has to do with the x values and the range has to do with the y values. Okay? If you have a graph that goes to infinity, okay, that means this graph is going to continue going on to infinity. That means your domain and range will have one number. Okay, so basically that number will be where does this arrow starts. If you notice, the arrow starts at this particular point. And what is the x value of this starting point? The starting point for x would be -3. Okay, so and if you notice, the arrow is pointing down and also is going this direction, so it will be going to the right. So that means your x value starts at -3 and is going to go forever to the right. So that means you will put an inequality sign of greater than, because basically is all the x values greater than -3. Okay? Alright, now sometimes your inequality sign will be greater than and sometimes will be greater than or equal to. It could also be that your inequality sign is less than or equal to. So when do I use greater than and less than versus greater than or equal to or less than or equal to? In other words, when do I have the little dash underneath the inequality sign? Basically, when you have a point, when you have a point that is solid. And if you don't have a solid point, meaning you have an empty circle, that means you're not going to have the dash. Okay? What that means is that, for example, for this function, the values for x that are valid will start at 3, including 3, in this case, I'm sorry, -3, and it's going to go forever to the positive side here. Okay? Alright, so basically in my domain, I'm going to put my values of x that are valid will start at -3 and all the numbers greater than -3. Okay? So if you notice, this arrow is pointing this way, the arrow is pointing to that direction too. The y value. Again, look at your starting point and look for the y value of that point. The y value is a 2. And if you notice, we start at 2 and we include all the values of y less than 2. So that means in this case, it's going to be less than. Also notice that the arrow is going down, so basically going down means you're going to the negative direction, so that means you'll be facing to the left. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Okay, if you notice, the starting point is a fill point, so that means I'm going to have a dash. Alright, so this will be my domain and this will be my range. Okay, let's keep problem number 2 for now, and let's take a look at number 3 for a second. Okay, number 3 is also in a function that has like an arrow, so that means it's going to go to infinity. That means this line goes and continue going on to infinity. So that means my domain and my range will have one number only. Okay, and that number will be where the arrow starts. The arrow starts right there. That's my initial point, and from there the arrow goes that direction. So what is the x value for my starting point of the arrow? My starting point is 5x5. Okay, now notice the direction that the arrow is facing. The arrow is facing this direction. So that means my inequality sign would also face that direction. Okay. Another way to look at it, this arrow is pointing, and basically we're starting x5, and we're including all the numbers less than 5. Okay? Alright, so we know the starting point is at 5. We know it's going to be less than. Last thing is, do I have a dash or not? Is it less than, or is it less than or equal to? It all depends on the point. The point is an empty circle, so therefore I do not have the little dash. So it just would be x less than 5. Very well. Let's go ahead and do the range now. Remember, because it's an arrow, we're just going to have one number, and that number will be the y value for the starting point. The y value is -2. And if you notice, the arrow is pointing up, so that means we're going up. Okay, so in other words, we're going to go to all the values of y that is greater than -2. Okay, and last thing, do I have a dash? No, because the point is an empty point. Very well. Now we're going to do this problem number 2, which does not have an arrow. If you have a function that does not have an arrow, that means you have a starting and end point. That means you're going to have an interval. That means you're going to have two numbers. So you're always going to write this. You're going to write x and these two symbols facing that direction, which means less than, less than. Okay, same thing for y. Okay, now how do I find the 2 points that are going to go over here? Basically, when you're finding x, you just move your pencil from left to right and stop when the pencil starts touching the line. When it touches the line, look at the x value. What is the starting x value? The starting x value is -8. Alright, so we found one endpoint. Now let's continue moving our pencil from left to right until we last touch the line. The last place where we touch the line will be right here. And what is the x value for that point right there? The x value is 2. Very well. Now it's time to do before we continue we need to ask ourselves, are we going to have a dash or not? Well, look at the endpoints. Are they solid points or they're empty points? They're both solids. So both symbols will have a dash. So this would be the interval between -8 through 2. Okay, now we're going to do the range. In the range, we do something similar where we move our pencil, but now instead of going left to right, we're going to move from bottom up. And starting at the bottom, as I move my pencil up, where is the first place I touch that point? If you notice, it's right there. And what is my y value when I touch that point? The y value is -4. So my first number is -4. Okay, and where is going to be my last value? My last value is at this point right here. And what is the y value of that? So now the question we have is, do I need to use a dash? Yes or no? Well, basically look at the endpoints, and they're solid points. So both the -4 is going to have a dash, and the 1 will have a dash. Okay? Alright, let's go on to number 4. Suppose I'm given the graph of this function, y square root of 25 minus x squared, and I want to find the domain. Remember, domain has to do with x, and basically you're going to go from the left to the right, and as I move from left to the right, my first x value, or the first place I hit the graph, is at -5. So I have x. First place I hit is -5. And the last place I touch that line is, it will be f5. So it'll be 5 here. And look at the endpoints. Both endpoints are filled circles, so I'm going to have a dash here and a dash there. So according to that, my correct answer is letter H. Alright, let's turn to the back side. And here I have more problems where I have to find domain and range. If you notice, all of these have endpoints. In other words, they don't go forever. They have a starting and an end point. So basically, all of these will have 2 points as I do the domain and range. So I'll always start like this. And for the domain, start from the left to the right. First place I hit is right there. What is my x value? My x value is -6. And as I continue moving my pencil from left to right, the last place I touch that line is right here. What is the x value at that point right there? Is 4. Now I need to look for the dashes. Because I have an empty circle at -6, this will not have a dash. But in this point right here, which is the 4, will have a dash because it's a solid point. Now for the range, you take your pencil like this, and you move it up until you touch the line, which would be right there. And right there, what is the y value of that point, the first point that I touched the line? Well, that point right there is -3. And as I continue moving my pencil from bottom up, the last place I touch that line will be at that point right there, which would be at 6. Again, look at the point -3 there. I'm going to have an empty circle, so no dash. And the last point I touch will be this point right here, and it will have a dash. Okay, so my domain will be this one, and my interval this one. So let's go on to the next one. Remember x and y. I know I'm going to have 2 numbers because there's no arrow here on the graph. For the domain, move your pencil or pen from left to right, and the first place I touch is right there at this point. And the x value of that point is -3. And it's not going to have a dash because that point is empty. And as I continue moving my pencil from left to right, the last place I touch is right there, which is 5. And again, no dash because it's an empty circle. For the y value, move your pencil from bottom up. The first place I touch is right there, and the y value is -2. And at that point right there is empty circle, so no dash. And as I continue moving my pencil up, the last place I touch is right here, which y value is 2. And again, no dash because it's an empty circle. Alright, last problem here, number 7. I'm going to have 2 values again. So I'll start with this. For the x value, use your pencil like this, move from left to right. What's the first place I touch? Is that point. What is the x value of that point? Is -7. And if you notice at that point right there, the point is solid, so I'm going to have a dash. That means it isn't going to include the value of -7. As I move my pencil from left to right, the last place I touch the line is right here, which is at x equals 1. So that will be my last place. And because this circle is empty, I'm not going to include the dash. Okay, for the range, move your pen or pencil from bottom up like this. The first place I touch is right there. What is my y value? My y value is a -6. And because this point is empty, I'm not going to include the dash. Move my pencil or pen up all the way to the last place it touches the line, which is right there. And the y value, that is 9. And it's going to have a dash because it's a solid point. Alright, very well. Alright, the last problem here is a multiple choice question and is asking for the range. So range, whenever you see the word range, you automatically think about y. So off the bat, you can eliminate the last 2 multiple choices, or letter H and letter J, because they're dealing with x and we want range. Okay, if we look at the range of this, we're going to start from the bottom up, and the very first place I touch this line is at 0, and the last place I touch is 100, which both graphs seems to show that. This graph is a continuous line, and if you notice, even though you cannot see a point there, but whenever you see a line, there is a point So basically these are field points, and the last place you touch the line as you move from left to right will be the top of this line right there, which is actually a field point 2. So in other words, my interval will be, like we said, from 0 to 100, and because this is a solid line, the first point will be solid and the last point will also be solid. So my answer will be letter G. Alright, very well. This concludes the lesson on domain and range. Thank you very much for your time and have a great day.